Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Ali and here I just talk to myself about books and then someone, maybe you, may or may not watch this at a later date. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about some of my favourite fantasy standalones, and these are mixtures of like cozy fantasies, just like straight up fantasy, and also some, I guess, fantasy romance you could call it. So yeah, let's get started. So first of all, going through this, I thought I might struggle a little bit to find like a good selection of fantasy standalones that I personally really enjoyed. And that was exactly the case. So it turns out that the majority of my fantasy books are in fact parts of series, or like at minimum a duology. I don't know whether that's because there aren't as many standalone fantasies out there, or if it's a case that maybe I subconsciously prefer fantasy series. I don't know. However, if you have any recommendations for any fantasy standalones, I'm very much up for that, because I am in the middle of so many series that I have literally lost track, and I do enjoy fantasy stories, so if I could just read one that is like a one-off book, that would be brilliant. So please, if you have any recommendations for any standalone fantasy books that you really enjoyed or you've heard great things about, just pop them down below because I will eat that up. So thanks. So first of all, I thought I would talk about a book I read a few years ago now, so it might not be quite as fresh in my memory, but I do really remember enjoying this. So this is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstein. This is a standalone, I guess you could call it speculative fiction slash fantasy. To me, it's fantasy enough that I wanted to include it in this small video. So I think I first heard about this on BookTube actually, so this is definitely one that I read because of BookTube. I think predominantly A Clockwork Reader mentioned this a lot as one of their favourite books, so I decided to give it a go and I really enjoyed it. So essentially this follows Celia and Marco, who are the proteges of two kind of warring illusionists slash magicians who are part of this travelling circus. Now this travelling circus, I think, is called like Le Cirque de Rêves, which I think means like the circus of dreams in French, and this is all set during kind of like a alternative Victorian London. So they get recruited when they're children, but by each one of these kind of magician illusionists, and they are grown to eventually basically spar against each other. So they're each taught different kind of magic techniques, etc. And when they come of age, they are both recruited separately to join this travelling circus, which actually runs on real magic and kind of appears at nighttime. So it's all very kind of magical and like, you know, circus-like and stuff. And yeah, this kind of story unravels where they are not necessarily enemies, but rivals for sure. And there's kind of an underlying plot of mystery and, you know, something else is going on, and they have to try and eventually work together to figure out what that is. And I just really loved this book. Like, the atmosphere it created, the world building was so enchanting. I just really loved it. I probably will read it again actually, because it's been a while now. I think it's been like 2 or 3 years since I read this, and yeah, I would like to give it another go for sure. But I do remember really enjoying it, and I would recommend it if you're after kind of a magical romance. There is a little plot of romance in here, you know, magical Victorian England alternative universe standalone fantasy, especially like one set in a circus. I have heard similar things about Caraval, but I haven't read that one yet, so I can't really comment. But I did enjoy Once Upon a Broken Heart series, so I would presume that I'd like Caraval as well. I do have the first book, I haven't read it yet, but obviously that isn't a standalone, it's a series. So if you're wanting just like a one-off book, maybe check this one out if you did like Caraval. Another one that I actually picked up from a Clockwork Reader booktube. So it turns out I get like the majority of my book recommendations from her, but that is A Far Wilder Magic by Alison Saft. So I think I had just finished watching Full Metal Alchemist, and I'd heard that this was basically like a fanfic of Roy and Risa, which I really enjoyed. Like I enjoyed the dynamic in their relationship, so I was like, whatever, let's give it a go. And it did sound really good, the premise. So again, this is one I really ended up loving and enjoying, and I would like to give it another read at some point. Essentially this follows two young adults, let's call them, who end up meeting out of pure chance. So you have Margaret, who is the daughter of a famous alchemist. However, she herself does not have any alchemy powers or any kind of affinity to alchemy. She does live in this village that has a hunt that kind of happens every year to chase like these mythical creatures, and the mythical creature appears near that village this year. So she knows that the half moon hunt will soon follow. She really wants to take part in this hunt. She is a sharpshooter, you know, in terms of like being able to shoot a shotgun type vibe. And if she were to kill the Halla, which is this mythical creature, it would bring her mother back, because she's kind of like abandoned her. She hasn't seen her in a while. So there's kind of that, and you know, you also get kind of fame and riches, etc. And she's always been a little bit of an outcast in the village. However, the issue is that you can only enter the hunt as a pair, and you need someone who basically can like shoot and stuff, and then you need an alchemist as well. She does not have the alchemist, and her mother isn't there to be able to do it with her. So when this young man called Weston appears at her door wanting to basically learn under the guide of her mother to become an alchemist, whilst the mother is in there, she allows him to stay on the deal that he will take part in the hunt with her. And so that's exactly what happens. So they kind of team up and they take part in this hunt, and then along the way they kind of develop a friendship and maybe something more. And again, I really liked this. I can definitely see why they said that it was a kind of Roy and Risa fanfic. Like, it definitely read like that. And yeah, it was just, again, very kind of wholesome. It touched upon some like quite hard topics about like familial relationships and, you know, feelings of not being enough and kind of always being an outcast within the society you're in. And it was just, yeah, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed this. I have read another book by Alison Saft, which was a dark and drowning tide, and I did like that one, but I would say out of the two, this one's still my favourite. I do also have a Fragile Enchantment to read, but I haven't read that one yet, and I think that's a completely different vibe again. So yeah, this one I would recommend. It's kind of like feels a bit like folklore inspired, and I don't know if it is or was intended to be, but that's kind of how it reads, like a little bit like a mythical fairy tale, very kind of like North European type vibes is what I got from it. But yeah, I would really recommend this book as well, and another great fantasy standalone. Next, I don't know if this actually counts as fantasy, but to me it does because it's got vampires in it. So to me, it's a fantasy, and that is A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This is hands down one of my favourite books I read last year, and probably just one of my favourite books ever. It is so beautifully written. It is lyrical, but not like pretentiously so, and it's just so emotive and beautiful. Like, I honestly just can't give this book like good enough praise. It's also just a stunning edition. Now, I have seen the indie version, and God, I wish I'd got that when, you know, before it got traditionally published, because that is even more beautiful. But this is essentially a retelling of Dracula from the perspective of Constanta, who was one of his first wives, or in this story is she his first wife? Anyway, in this story, she's one of his first wives, or so she thinks, and it basically just follows her experience of being Dracula's wife and being under his power and how she experiences life through him. And at first, you know, she's terrified, etc., but then he's like saved her, so she feels like a sense of gratitude towards him and ends up following him. But then the longer they are together, the more she realizes that he's not all that appears to be. And when he draws another two people into their relationship and realizes that actually the power he's exerting above all of them is toxic, she kind of hatches a plan with these two other people to make sure that they are able to be free in the future. And yeah, it's just a very beautiful story. Like, I just love anything. I just love retellings, to be honest, of anything, but in particular I feel like I've been very obsessed about like Dracula based retellings recently, or just like Dracula-esque stories. So I read Carmilla, I read Dracula last year as well, and I just, you know, loved them all. So I'm getting back into my vampire era, but in the best sort of way. No like shade on Twilight and stuff, but this is better. This is better. There's no cringe here. There's no cringe here. Next is another favourite that I absolutely loved. It's again another one that has an element of romance in it, but in a very kind of wholesome way, and that is A Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. First of all, can we just have a look at this stunning cover? Like, the artwork on this is just beautiful, and I love it so much. Anyway, so A Sorcery of Thorns. When did I read this? I can't even remember, like a few years ago again. This follows Elizabeth, who is I don't know if she's an orphan, but anyway, she doesn't have a family, but was adopted into this library being run by kind of these like nun figures, but they're not, they're like librarians. And she's always grown up in this library, and her sole dream is to become like a warden of the library, to be able to look after these like magic grimoires. Now, this library hosts some of the most dangerous grimoires in the world, and they're all classed at different levels, with class 10 being like the most deadly of grimoires. If they are kind of provoked in any way, they can become actual monsters, and that is exactly what happens one night when the warden of the library is murdered, and the highest level class 10 grimoire disappears and becomes a, you know, monster, attacks everyone, disappears. Elizabeth is the only one left awake. Everyone's under some sort of like sleep enchantment, so she chases after this monster, and eventually she gets kind of like not framed, but it appears that she is now going to have to be judged by like a council of sorcerers, because they believe that she had something to do with this grimoire escaping. And she ends up having to work with someone she does not like, who is one of the sorcerers, one of the strongest sorcerers, I guess, who live in the kingdom, who is called Nathaniel Thorne, who has made a pact with a demon, and that is how sorcerers get their powers, called Silas. So there's this kind of like found family dynamic. I love Silas as a character as well. I love the relationship that blooms between Elizabeth and Nathaniel Thorne. It is just a very good read, and to say that it's a standalone novel, it actually achieves a lot. Like, there's a lot of world building, the character development's really good, and you feel like it's actually quite an epic kind of story, even though it's not that long. Like, I think it's, how many pages? Like what, 450 pages, and you know, it just manages to do everything it needs to. It's a lovely story that's very well wrapped up. It doesn't need a sequel, it doesn't have a cliffhanger. It's just great, and I really enjoyed it, so I would very much recommend it. Now, I do have a caveat. This is a standalone novel, however there has been a small accompanying novella released as well. I still consider this a standalone because this is, oh gosh, still consider this a standalone because this is just kind of like a little very short tale that kind of takes place around maybe the end of this one, and it doesn't really add loads to the story, but it's very sweet, and I would also recommend reading this if you did enjoy Sorcery of Thorns. And also, again, the cover is just stunning. But yeah, I don't think that this you know, disqualifies it from being a standalone fantasy, and I would highly recommend you pick this up if you want, you know, again, another enchanting book based, because gosh, don't we just love books about books? And this, you know, it's about a library full of books, magical books, but books nevertheless, and just like this lovely blooming romance found family vibe, which is again one of my favorite tropes ever. So I would highly recommend this book as well. Next we have a proper fantasy, and this is one of my favorite standalones ever. Like I just love this so much, and I would highly recommend it, and that is The Sword of Kaigan by M.L. Wang. This is an Asian kind of historical inspired fantasy. I think it's meant to maybe be like Japanese inspired. There's a family called the Matsuda family who has for generations been one of the strongest families in this country. They live on a peninsula, like right at the top of this peninsula, which has been nicknamed the Sword of Kaigan because they have been the protectors of the realm from any kind of enemies or like attackers that have been trying to like get into the empire. So Mamoru, so we follow three characters predominantly. So we follow a kind of like teenage boy called Mamoru, who is you know, the heir to this Matsuda family. He knows what's expected of him. Eventually he will come into these powers that will allow him to like wield ice and water, etc., and he is expected to kind of lead the efforts to protect the empire. And we also follow his mother, who came from her own powerful family but kind of gave it all up to be a housewife, and kind of we follow her story and what that meant for her, and you know, the sense of loss that she's felt and the sense of loss of identity most predominantly. And then we also followed the father, who I don't remember the name of right now, who is a very enigmatic character. You know, he's very quiet, he's very silent, you don't know much about him, but he has a very like good, well, he has a very interesting character development throughout this story. So this kind of then takes place when the empire is put under threat by a new enemy, kind of like the strongest one that it's ever faced, and you know, they end up splitting up and having to protect themselves, their family members, their loved ones, as well as the empire. It is just brilliant. This book is so good. I do think that this could definitely like have been the beginning of a series, and I don't know if it was intended to be originally, but it is a standalone and it does work well as a standalone. I just loved it so much that honestly I would have been glad to read more and more books in this kind of world. But yeah, it's very beautiful. It's kind of set in a very cold and like snowy place, and it was like kind of a perfect thing to read around, I think I must have read it around like December, November time, maybe not last year, the year before. And it was just like the perfect time to read this book because it was cold outside. I just felt like what they might have been feeling, although definitely not, because it's probably definitely colder in this tale. The action scenes are brilliant. Now I love action and like fight scenes in books, and I love them when they're described so well that you can literally physically envision them in your brain. Now I know that that's a thing that not everyone can do, like actually be able to imagine like the story and the characters and be able to like visualize it in your head, but I can, and I really love to be able to do that, but I do need well written kind of material to be able to do that, and this just gave me that. It was like I could literally just see a movie in my head. It was brilliant, and I cannot talk enough about it. I've made my friends read this book. I hope they've enjoyed it as much as I did. Probably not, because I have enjoyed it a lot, but I would very much recommend this if you like Asian inspired historical fantasies with you know, a lot of action, a lot of, you know, fight scenes, etc. There's not a lot of romance in this. Actually, I don't think there's any romance in this. This is definitely more about kind of family relationships, family dynamics, and as I said, the kind of that historical element and the expectations that are placed upon you by society and your elders. So very, very good, and I would recommend it. And I do have M.L. Wang's other book that has now been traditionally published called Blood Over Bright Haven, which is completely different. I think it's like a dark academia story, and I'm really hoping to pick that up in March so I can read that as well. But this, honestly, one of my favourite kind of new discoveries in terms of authors for sure in the last few years. Next is one of the probably books that had the biggest impact on me in the last few years. So I read this in 2020 during a very grief-filled period of my life. There was a lot going on, you know, as a lot of people experienced around that time, and this book saved me, and that is Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. Now, I've made it no secret that I love TJ Klune. I love everything about his writing. I love that the most prominent theme in a lot of his books is found family, and that is probably one of my is it my number one trope? I feel like at this stage it probably is. Like, I just love found family stories. It just warms my heart. It really engages me, and it just gives me hope, which is something that you really need sometimes. So as I said, I read this whilst I was going through a lot of grief, and this book, just some of the quotes from this book have just stuck in my mind. It's just so beautiful, and I will never forget how it made me feel. And as I said, I feel like it saved me. I feel like it helped me. It you know, didn't magically cure the grief, but I feel like it helped me on the way to kind of move past it. So this follows the tale of Wallace, who passes away, and he's not a very liked person, and his funeral ends up being very sparsely attended. And when a Grim Reaper comes to collect him, he's very reluctant to follow her, and also very angry that like he's had basically such a negative impact on people in his life that now nobody will come and say goodbye to him as he leaves this world forever. So he's very kind of like bitter about this whole situation. He decides to follow the Grim Reaper to this magical tea shop where the owner, Hugo, who is a, you know, real life person, helps kind of newly lost souls to cross over to the other side. And unfortunately there are quite significant consequences if that doesn't happen. Kind of follow the story of Wallace as he gets accustomed to no longer being alive, and also decides to kind of do everything that he wasn't able to do in the 7-day period that he has before he's required to cross over. Otherwise, you know, those consequences will happen. And it's just the most wholesome, beautiful story for me. Like, I loved this book so much. Just the dynamic between Hugo and Wallace. Also, all of TJ Klune's books are like male to male queer romances, and this one was too, and it was just wonderful. Like, but as I said before, my main element was that found family element. Like, it's not just about the romance, it's literally about building this connection so deep that they become family, like, immediately. And that is the case for all of his books. And you know, if The House in the Cerulean Sea hadn't had a sequel come out like last year, I would have included it in this pile as well. But now it's no longer a standalone fantasy, but this one is. Is it a fantasy? I feel like it is a fantasy, because there's definitely like characters that aren't humans and stuff in this, and it's maybe like a bit like paranormal and stuff, but I would consider it a fantasy. Also, I love this so much that originally I had the, you know, normal hardback. However, I had to get this Lumicrate special edition because it's just stunning. So these are the edges, and this is the naked hardcover, which is just stunning. Beautiful. And we've got some end papers here as well, and also it is signed by TJ Klune himself, so very happy. And I did end up getting The House in the Cerulean Sea special edition as well to match. As I said, this is probably one of those books that had, like, it changed my life. It altered my brain chemistry, and for the better. It just helped me so much, and I will forever ever be grateful for this book and to TJ Klune for writing it, because I honestly, I give this so much, like, just thank you. Next is probably one of like the most unique books I've ever read, and I really loved as well, and that is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. And this, I think, is meant to be very loosely inspired by an actual historical figure called Giovanni Piranesi, who was a Italian archaeologist and architect and artist, and was known for sketching out these like almost like jail-like cells in like ancient Rome type vibe. And this book follows a character who is almost trapped in such a place. So it follows this character who lives in complete isolation. He is trapped in an unending labyrinth of kind of these rooms that continuously get flooded by water that we think is maybe coming from the ocean, but I'm not 100% sure. And the only things he's got in that world with him to keep him company are some birds and some skeletons and some statues, and that is all there is. However, There is also this character that appears every now and then through this magical portal called the Other, and that's who called him Piranesi. And it just follows kind of this daily life of this character as he moves around these chambers, because he's like learned to he's learned like when certain places will flood at certain times, so it kind of moves around them, you know, it's become part of his daily life. However, that's all kind of starts to become disrupted when this Other starts appearing more often, and it's almost like they're studying him. And it's just, again, it's such an odd book. I've never read anything quite like it, and I've never read anything quite like it ever again after this. But I loved it. Again, I'm not one for like really lyrical, poetic type books, because a lot of the time I just need it very clearly described to me. You know, give me some world building, give me character development. Don't make me like speculate too hard. But this one was beautiful. Like, this was so well written and so captivating that I'm thinking about it still, like 3 years later, or whenever it was. I can't even remember when this came out, but I did get it like literally when it was first published. So yeah, again, this also came out in 2020. So maybe I read it in 2021. But again, such a good book. I also just realised, look at the cute the end papers are, and the foiling, and also the actual hardcover is stunning as well. I feel like I forgot that this was here, but anyway, I love foiling on hardcovers, so yeah. But yeah, this is another great standalone kind of speculative fantasy, almost bordering on sci-fi, I would say. But yeah, really, really enjoyed it. I can't 100% tell you what the actual plot is about, but this is definitely more about like how it makes you feel and the vibes and kind of the sense of loneliness and being like completely alone, and all of a sudden like your world being disrupted and your routine being disrupted, and kind of there's just a lot going on. I feel like it's also meant to be maybe a little bit of like an allegory on kind of mental illness, because I think the character ends up experiencing things like memory loss and what others would like define as madness, but that, you know, is something that I would expect people to experience if they've been alone in like such a deprived world for so long. So yeah, I don't know if you can really call it madness, but anyway, this is a really, really good book. And in a lighter, lower stakes vein, we have The Teller of Small Fortunes by Julie Leong. This was a book I read at the end of last year, and a very surprising kind of high-rated book by me. I really, really loved it. And to be honest, when I first read the blurb, I got this at Yalk, so last November. When I first read the blurb, I was like, this is going to be the book for me, because it sounds like pure found family. And I wasn't wrong. Like, it 100% was exactly that, and it just, again, warmed my heart, just made me feel all like cozy and warm, and I just loved it so much. So this follows the tale of Tao, who is a small fortune teller who travels around the world with her mule and her like cart or caravan, I guess, and tells small fortunes. She has the ability to tell bigger fortunes, however, due to something that happened in her past, she's reluctant to, because she believes that it will cause more harm than good, so it restricts herself to only telling small fortunes. She's never really stayed anywhere for a long time, because one, she feels like the locals will like only like her up to a certain point and then feel like they don't want her there anymore, but also because she doesn't want to get too comfortable anywhere because of what's happened in her past. She doesn't feel like maybe she deserves to have that sort of like family around her anymore. However, she meets this mercenary and this reformed thief who are looking for the mercenary's lost daughter, and she decides, or kind of gets roped into helping them out, helping them to find this lost daughter. And at some point they also come across a magical cat and a baker who bakes very delicious treats that look not so delicious. And yeah, it's just the tale of them traveling through the country looking for this child, and just the adventures they get up to, and kind of the relationships that build between them, how they develop as characters and as people, as individuals, but also as part of like this new family group that they're part of. And again, it was just so beautiful. Like, I honestly don't know what else to say. I love found family, and I love cozy fantasies as well, and this was definitely that. And this was perfect for like a cold winter night where you just want to curl up, like, if you've got an actual fireplace, then yeah, put the fire on, but I don't, so I just put like, you can get like those little fire flame things that you can put on like Netflix, and then just like a warm like peppermint tea or herbal tea of kinds. Like, it was definitely one of those evenings type vibes. And yeah, I would highly recommend it. And again, this is another one that has a stunning foiling on the cover of a beautiful little cat. So yeah, another one I would highly recommend as a fantasy standalone. And last but very much not least, it's the one and only Babel by R.F. Kuang, or Rebecca F. Kuang. And can I just say, I got this signed and I met her and she's absolutely amazing. But this was probably one of my, no, actually still is one of my favourite books. This is a dark academia story which follows Robin, who is a young boy that's taken out of an alternative Canton region, so a region of China, from this like older white man who takes him back to, again, an alternative England, so like Oxford, I think the Tower of Babel is meant to be, to study at this prestigious college. I think it's meant to be Oxford College. But in this world, basically, it's definitely meant to be kind of a reflection on colonialism and like the British Empire, maybe like some of the, well, not maybe, the harm that it did to a lot of the colonies. It's around also covering like the Opium Wars and the impact that had on like China, and also just the way that the British Empire kind of oppressed a lot of these countries whilst still utilising a lot of the resources. And that's kind of exactly what this is about. So this is predominantly about like language and translation. So in this world there is a magic system that is based on translation, so being able to couple words in English and other languages on these silver bars allows you to like do different things with these silver bars, like you get like powers basically from them. And Robin is recruited because they need someone who is able to speak Cantonese and Mandarin natively, and he ends up being put into like a group with another two people who are kind of like ethnic minorities, but there's also like a white girl who exhibits a lot of kind of racist traits and kind of, problematic thinking. And yeah, it just follows their story. There's a lot kind of going on. There's a bit of like a revolution. Well, I say a bit, like the entire book is about kind of the revolution that takes place within this college when the people that kind of been exploited by the college decide that they don't want to take it anymore. And again, it's a very heart-wrenching story. Some people found it very on the nose with kind of, as I said, this allegory of the British Empire, etc. But I didn't care about that. Like, whatever, yes, it needs to be on the nose sometimes, and I really enjoyed how this explained the impact of colonialism that it still can have today. And also I just really enjoyed how academic it actually was. So throughout the book you have some footnotes where it feels like you're reading an academic text. There's like actual footnotes that explain to you about like different languages, different like translation techniques, and then about kind of the magic system, etc. And again, a lot of people found that like maybe over-explanative, is that a word? I don't know. Over-explaining stuff. And I feel like I saw some reviews saying that they felt like the author thought they were like dumb and needed everything explained to them. But I don't know. I don't think that it was like that for me. For me, it was more like, this is genuinely just meant to be such a vibe in terms of like academic text that it's kind of tried to replicate that, and I appreciated all those footnotes, and I felt like they added to like the story as well as like the atmosphere. And as with any R.F. Kuang book, this if you're wanting a happy ending, this is not the book for you. However, it will be very impactful, it will be very like engaging, you will be absolutely like just thrown into this world and yeah, along for the ride. Again, she makes very imperfect characters, and I really like that about her writing. I don't think I've read a single book where like a character's been good and like perfect. We've got the Poppy War trilogy, which is very much not about like a good perfect character, and same thing with Yellowface. This is no different. Like, no one in here is what you would call like a perfect fairy tale character. They all have flaws, and that's what makes them feel so much more real and so much more kind of relatable in a way. And yeah, I just love the writing. I find it really immersive, and I just, yeah, really, really loved this book, and I would highly recommend it. And given how big it is, I think I read it in a couple of days. I was just completely hooked. Like, I would gladly read this again. I'm very, very much looking forward to Catabasis. That comes out later this year. It's another kind of a dark academia type vibe, but follows the tale of two students who have to go into the world of hell to retrieve their professor. So I think it's meant to be related to like Dante's Inferno, which I read recently. So I'm very intrigued to see how that goes. So that was my list of kind of my favourite standalone fantasies that I own and have read. I do have a few others on my book cart that I have yet to read and I would like to get to soon. However, I also just have so many fantasy series to get to, or to like finish off, that I'm in the middle of at the moment. So yeah, I just need to get a move on. I feel like I need there to be like two of me so I can read whilst also just living. But yeah, so let me know down below if you've read any of these books and you thought about them. Let me know, as I said, if there's any other standalone fantasy books that you would recommend. And yeah, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, pop a like and subscribe if you want to see more. See you soon.